And hello once again, my name is Lupus, and today I'm going to be talking about the reception of drama. This is basically the last of the little videos here that I'm doing about drama. This is the fourth of fourth. Now, before we get into it, let me just say that if you appreciate these videos that I make, and I made a whole lot of these videos, going over a lot of different literary theory concepts, you can support me if you so desire by either going on to Patreon, or you can check out some of my books, but we're not going to talk about that now. We'll talk about that later, although you can find that stuff in the description. So let's get to the actual video, where we're going to talk about the reception of drama. So basically, reception, remember, refers to how it is perceived and taken in by people, spectators, the audience. How do they take in a performance, and how do they relate to it? How do they understand it? What do they do with it once they have taken it in? Now, immediately, spectatorship is comprised of a dynamic process, right, and a changing representative state. So basically, as the performance progresses on stage, the process whereby you understand it changes, and also the actual representation changes. So remember, the things on stage are visual and audio, and those things start to change as time goes on in the story that you are watching, which means that spectatorship is made of multiple things, right? Things are changing, right? The performance continues and things change on stage. So basically, you are receiving things as they are being created. Now, here's a very interesting little thing. Firstly, there is a distinction to be made between a spectator and the audience. A spectator is a single person, the audience is the whole. It's a very, very simple way to understand it, right? However, the spectator, because they are related to each other, right? The spectator is influenced by the audience, but also affects the audience. So they are influenced and they influence each other. So the audience is made up of spectators, but each individual spectator has their own thing. So, for instance, something that's very interesting is that an individual has a certain emotional composure and intellectual alertness when they are by themselves. However, when you are part of an audience, something kind of changes. This does happen, even in like other areas. You know, you get the idea of sort of a group think, a group mentality. Think about also like mob thought. When people get together in a giant mob of people, they can start to do things that do not necessarily apply to, that they wouldn't do by themselves. Think, and actually, funnily enough, there is a line from the Men in Black movie, the first one, that kind of encapsulates this. Character says, a person is smart. People are like dumb, panicky animals. So a person, an individual, is intelligent and capable of controlling themselves. In a group, in a mob, basically as people, they lose a lot of that. And that is what happens on stage, right? You lose some of your intellectual alertness. Basically, you kind of enjoy things more. You're basically less likely to criticize things because it is enjoyable just being there and around other people. Like, I remember watching a comedic performance that I saw it on stage and I thought it was hilarious, and then I actually saw the same show on DVD because they had done it. It was basically them performing that same show, and it really wasn't very funny. But when I was there, it was very, very funny, and it wasn't like this was 10 years apart from one another. This was like a few months, so it wasn't like my sense of humor had changed. It was just that when you're in that group, it is much, much easier to let yourself go, and also to open yourself up to this emotional component. You're more likely to laugh, to cheer, to enjoy yourself when there are a lot of people around. So that is just something that's very interesting, right? Being in a group actually affects you as a person and the way that you respond to things, which is very interesting. So it is important to make a differentiation between the spectator and the audience, because they are different. The audience is made up of spectators, but the audience is kind of its own beast on its own. And now something that's also quite interesting is that the spectator is never fully immersed within the stage itself, right? You always know when you're watching a play that this is not real, right? The stage cannot be truly immersive because you will always know, like, the only way that you could not basically know and be fully immersed is maybe if there's basically something mentally wrong with you, that you cannot differentiate reality from fiction. Because when you are sitting and watching a play, you know that those are actors. You know that those are props. Like imagine a play in which someone dies, right? A lot of Shakespeare, people die. They're not using real swords. They're using prop swords. When someone gets stabbed in Hamlet, they're not actually dead. The character is dead. The actor isn't dead. So, this is an important thing. You are never fully immersed because you have suspended your disbelief. So when you are receiving drama, when you are open to the reception of drama, you basically know it isn't real and it cannot be real. So, this is also something that happens. When you are a spectator, right, you perceive yourself as part of the audience. So basically you know you're part of the audience. You're not alone there. It's not like someone's performing for you. They're performing for a whole group of people, which means that you're both influencing the audience and you're influenced by it. If enough spectators do not respond as they are supposed to, then it will mess with the audience vibe, basically. You get this a lot, where people do talk about there being basically like hot and cold audiences, like good and bad audiences. Because maybe a good way to look at this is actually when it comes to stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedians, talk to any good stand-up comedian, not, you get some people who call themselves stand-up comedians and then they just make very sad content on YouTube, but basically people who are actually stand-up comedians, they will all basically say, listen, there are times where you bomb. There are times when you were not playing the audience well. People did not like what you had to say. They did not find you funny. They're not laughing. And there is nothing more painful. Like, I've never seen a comedian bomb. I haven't seen that many comedians live. So, but it happens. But just imagine, you're there watching a comedian and they're telling jokes and no one is laughing. That is one of the most painfully agonizing things I can imagine. And I can only imagine how painful it is for the comedian who is not making anyone laugh. But that is the thing. The audience does influence how the play happens. They influence the performance, and the performance influences them. The singular spectator influences everyone else. Imagine if a single spectator, just one person, boos. It will change the entire vibe. The entire audience will have a harder time getting back. Imagine if everyone's loving it. Everyone's like, this is so great, and then one person just boos or shouts something out that's maybe rude or insensitive or something like that. Or bigoted. That will then completely change the vibe of the entire thing. You have changed the audience by being a bad spectator, basically. Or being a spectator that did not do what you were kind of supposed to do. So, yeah, that is something that's important to understand. Now, also, of course, as I said, you're susceptible to emotion on stage, and also you understand the immersion is never complete. These are important things to keep in mind about the role of the spectator. So, the next little thing to sort of talk about is that's when it comes to the idea of the spectator. However, drama is not just people watching something on stage. It is also people reading dramatic texts. You are still consuming drama if you're not at a theater. If you're just reading it, like it in book form, you are still experiencing drama, but it's deeply distinct from being a spectator. If you are a reader, being a reader is not the same as being a spectator. They're not the same thing, and that's something to keep in mind. Now, the thing that you can do, if you are a reader, you are able to familiarize yourself with this fictional world. You can basically take part in this fictional world. You can experience the fictional world. You can satisfy the curiosity to basically understand what it is like to see it. You could imagine yourself from a certain spectator perspective. You could sort of be sitting there and reading it and imagining what it would be like to see it on stage. Or you might be imagining it not on stage. You might be imagining it a different way. It's actually an interesting distinction between my fiance and I. She has education in theater. I have education in literary theory. When I read a play, I imagine it more like a movie. I imagine the setting. She imagines what it would be like on stage. So different people do perceive it differently. You do receive and have a reception of drama in different ways to one another because you're different people. And so you perceive things to be in different ways. So the reader and the spectator are distinct from one another. Okay? And they understand things on different levels. So some of the fundamental differences between a spectator and a reader are on levels such as the representational, emotional, intellectual, and aesthetic level. On the representational level, if you are a reader, you are not actually seeing the representation. You're reading the words, but you're not seeing the stage. You're not seeing the actors. You're not seeing the props. You're not seeing the stage design. You are imagining those things, which means you're having a fundamentally different experience to somebody who is watching it. You also have a different emotional and intellectual understanding. You are less likely to be emotional if you're reading it than if you were actually on stage. And you're also more likely to be able to be critical of something and to interrogate it from a more intellectual perspective if you are not on stage, if you are based or not in the audience, if you are instead just reading it. And also your aesthetic appreciation will be different because you are not seeing it the same way. You are not actually seeing it on the same level as a spectator at all. You are perceiving it in a completely different aesthetic sense. Right? Your aesthetics are now in your head rather than on a stage. So your understanding will be completely distinct. So there are major differences when it comes to the reception of drama between a spectator and a reader. And if you are writing about this, like writing an essay about it, you need to be able to understand and note those distinctions. How is it different for different groups to perceive and receive drama? Now, the last little thing here, which are in the study guide that all of this comes from, this is just sort of an extra little thing. When it comes to difficult subjects, think of things like violence and nudity, different groups will respond in different ways. Now, let's just say, I'm going to make a couple of things here. Now, I'm going to first speak from a South African perspective. If you're a South African, imagine the distinction between putting on a play, let's say a play that is very, very progressive. Let's say a play that includes queer characters. So a play that is basically about people who are gender non-conforming. Maybe there's drag performances on stage, whatever. Do you think that an audience in Cape Town will be different to an audience in the middle of the Karoo? Or if I'm not going to speak from like this is an American perspective, because that'll be more people know those places. There will be a distinction between someone putting on a play like this in Los Angeles and someone putting a play like this on in the Deep South, like I don't know, like Alabama or something. Which group is more likely to be accepting of more progressive ideals, and which one is more likely to want to have traditional things on stage? Right? That is something to keep in mind. Different audiences respond differently to different things. If you, let's even say, if you have a play that is explicitly racist, right? A play that is actually racist on purpose, like it's trying to be racist, it wants to be racist. Which audience do you think will appreciate it more? Racists or non-racists? The audience does make a difference on how something is perceived and how it is received. If you make a play that is about terrible people are more likely to like it. So that is something that is worth keeping in mind, okay, when it comes to how people perceive drama. And also, of course, you need to keep the social dimension of theatre in mind. Theatre exists for many reasons. South Africa is a good example of this. South Africa had things like workshop theatre, where theatre, you couldn't just have theatre. Because this was during apartheid. You couldn't just have theatre. Because if you had theatre that was, say, for instance, against the government, against apartheid, if you wrote anything down and the police raided you, well, they would have some pretty good evidence against you now, because you wrote down all of your thoughts. But what if, instead of writing it down, you workshopped it? You don't write it down. You instead have a bunch of friends, and you have all of your actors and the directors, and you don't write anything down. You basically create the play together without writing anything down. So then, if the police bust in, you can just stop the performance, And, well, nothing has been said. There's no materials. Where is the book? Where's the script that says the anti-apartheid things? It's nowhere. You can't arrest us. You see, there is a social dimension to theatre. Theatre exists within a specific socio-economic climate. It exists within a specific political situation. When it comes to, say, poverty theatre, there's a reason that it's like poverty theatre. There's a reason that they don't have expensive sets. It's because they can't afford it. If you can't afford a thing, well, then you are, less likely to be able to have the thing. Right? When poor people put on theatre, they maybe won't have the same kind of elaborate, expensive sets, but it's still theatre. But it is determined by the social situation around it. Theatre can also be used to protest things. Right? It can be used for so many different reasons. It is determined by the society around it. And that is something very important to keep in mind when it comes to the reception of drama. Alright, that's where I'm going to end it now. This is sort of the last of the drama videos I think that I'll be making. So yeah, hopefully it was helpful and beneficial and educational and all those other words. And if you appreciate the stuff that I do and you would like to support me, you can check out my Patreon, or you can buy some of my books if you so desire. And if you don't, you can also like, comment, subscribe, do all those kind of things. Ask me things. I don't, whatever. Yeah, that's about it. Otherwise, I hope you have, an absolutely great day, week, and month ahead, and goodbye.